Okay,
I'm in the right spot.
I'd like to welcome you to our
Right up your nose.
update of the COG Transportation Master Plan. This is the steering committee that's been invited to this. The expectation will be from the steering committee, we flow this out to the rest of the mayors on the board. So we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of it. I would like to welcome our ones that are going to present to us today. Jeff, Jesse, go ahead.
Okay, maybe these are our consultants with Kimley Horn. We have Brent and Eric. Maybe we'll let them introduce themselves and then we'll go around so they know who we all are and kind of what jurisdictions we represent. And then we'll kind of just turn the time over to you guys and we'll let them take the meeting from there. So.
Sounds good. And my name is Brent Crowther with Kimley Horn. And I'm in our Salt Lake City office and I'm the project manager for this effort for the consulting team.
Similar to Brent, Eric Sweat with Kimley Horn, helping as project engineer.
And then Jesse Mott, staff of the COG and of Cache County.
Larry Johnson, Mayor of Paradise.
Stephanie Miller, Mayor of Hiram.
Sam Odd, Logan City Public Works Program Manager.
Craig Hidalgo.
Last name
Odd, ODD.
ODD.
Craig Hidalgo, Mayor of Clarkston.
David
Chair of the
Zook.
COG.
And Chair of the COG.
Don't try to get out of it yet.
I'm David Zook, Cache County Executive.
Chris Monson, Smithfield City Mayor.
Jeff Gilbert with the cash appeal and staff with the COG. Looks like I have Tim Baird on line two.
Hey folks, Tim Baird with Fair and Peers supporting Kimley Horn on forecasting and some of the analysis and prioritization.
Okay, take it away and
Great. So you all should have a packet here. We're going to walk through the PowerPoint here. And I give you a brief status update of where we're at within the project. Primary purpose of today is to, we've got a map with all the projects that we've, kind of the database that we populated from the stakeholder interviews that Jesse and Jeff did earlier this year. We've got a draft kind of prioritization criteria, and that's kind of the main purpose of our meeting today is kind of take a look at that and kind of give your ideas and thoughts on how that should be applied to the projects. So we've got a PowerPoint to walk us through. Okay. There you go. So, the project list that we developed, our database has 165 or so projects, and that was based on stakeholder interviews were done earlier this year that were recorded, and then we went back through those and were able to digest that information and define specific projects from each of those. There's a little bit of follow-up on some projects probably outstanding that we'll want to have you confirm that that's the correct project, that's the definition, etc. So we'll get that information to you for review, and that is online that you to facilitate that review.
You want to go back?
No, sorry, no, that's good. So it was 181 projects, 139 of which we defined as capacity projects, which is a primary focus of the COG funding. We have maintenance projects were identified for 14, and then there's 28 projects that were really hard for us to understand the purpose and the intent of those, and so that's some of the data that we'll want to go back and have you. 56 of those 181 projects that were identified do not meet COG criteria for these reasons here, and so they're in the database, but they won't be able to be advanced to kind of the funding portion. Maintenance projects within the urbanized area per COG policy. A standalone active transportation project. So that's a standalone shared use path, a standalone bike lane, etc. The projects are eligible to include active transportation, but it needs to be part of a larger project. Correct me if I'm saying anything.
So technically by state code, active transportation, even pure active transportation projects are eligible. However, the COG has kept the focus on deemed roadway projects, so. We've typically not done standalone trail projects. It's usually, if there's a road project, we encourage and support active transportation elements, sidewalks, shared use path, whatever it might be, as part of that roadway project, but we don't typically do standalone. The COG could change that if you want, but that will obviously dilute the focus on roads if you do that. And I want to say it real quietly, but there's even a chance the airport might qualify for this.
But the airport might qualify for that.
Or COG fund. We'd have to check. There's certain definitions of
So-
it
In essence, what you're saying.
by
when-
state code, I mean.
When we're talking roads. But that doesn't mean with the changing of. Our cities and stuff like that, that would also include bicycle routes and stuff like that, because they're gonna be more and more of an issue.
Yeah.
On the roads. So is that considered
That's
here?
eligible. Bicycle, designated bicycle lanes on roads are eligible because they are part of a roadway project.
I just
So
wanna
this
make
would
sure I
be
understood that.
a shared use path on a separate alignment disconnected from a roadway
Is not,
is not eligible.
okay,
Yeah.
And we solicited active transportation projects as part of this effort because we were looking at CMPO as well as trying to gather information, for Landis that maybe apply for outdoor rec grant. So it's not that those active transportation projects are still there. It's just typically COG funding for standalone projects. We haven't done that in the past and our policies don't really allow it. Does that make sense? So it's not that we're ignoring those. The CMPO plan, we'll look at those and we're still looking to pull those off. It's just unless the COG decides otherwise, the COG master plan would only deal with roadway projects.
which means we could also, on our COG plans, we do every year. We should probably look at that and say, okay, are you taking this into consideration? Because more and more people are looking for alternative transportation vehicles. They're not going to be using cars because of how populated we're getting. It's gonna get more and more used here than we used to.
And honestly, the best way to deliver active transportation improvements is doing a part of a roadway improvement project.
That's what I'm saying, like-
Economies of scale.
A couple
do
years
it all
ago,
at the
we
same
had,
time.
Logan was doing some, and one of the questions came up was, are you gonna have a bike ride along there? Well, no, we hadn't thought about that, but we could. That's something as a COG we can
Right,
encourage, correctly, correct?
correct.
Yeah, and if you're coming in to do a road reconstruct, or even narrow road, and you're gonna widen it out and you're gonna add bike lanes and all those things, that's encouraged, but. If you just have a road here and you're selling over here, and just put a bike trail randomly out here and there's nothing else going on, that's where we've kind of separated those out.
Right, okay. Thank you, appreciate that.
We got chairs for you up here, guys, if you want.
Sorry, I'm only.
No worries.
You got a file, Jason? Yeah.
We got a pile for you here as well.
Okay, cool.
All right, any more questions on that? Okay. So Eric, you want to walk us through the next?
Okay.
So this breaks down a little bit more one of the projects that we, kind of the remaining from those 181 that are now screened. So capacity projects 86, intersection focus projects 22. And then we do have a dozen bridge, culvert, or drainage that are part of the capacity projects. Maintenance. What did that mean on the maintenance only? Yeah, rural maintenance. Rural maintenance, okay. Yeah, okay. Sounds good. Let's go to talk about this criteria next. Yeah.
Yeah. So the project prioritization process, which we're gonna engage all of these projects on, is based mostly off. Do you want to go through projects first?
Yeah, maybe it'd be good to just show that map.
Yeah. So this is all. There it is.
This is gonna overwhelm you. $50 billion worth of project. I'm kidding, I don't know. But, you know, our need is great. We captured it though, which is great. We've never probably so fully captured our needs in terms of projects. Well, why don't you walk us through it?
Yeah, so on this map, anything you see in orange is what we had classified as a roadway project. The yellow crosses are an intersection-based project, so a signalization or a roundabout or some type of intersection improvement. Bridges are the blue dots or blue bars like this, and then active transportation are the green. Now, this is all of the projects mapped. Including those that are potentially screened out, but we wanted them all on a map to just kind of see where is the need, where are some of the hotspots, and kind of visually see what was told to us through all of the interviews that Jesse and Jeff completed with you all. So in total, this is going to be available for anyone to view. And we'd like confirmation that we captured the correct projects. If you click on, so for instance, if we're in North Logan here and click on a project, tells you what we had classified as a project type, the category, and then a brief description of what was told to us as the project details.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Why is it that it seems like there are gaps on a lot of the routes? Yeah, just there's a piece. Why is that? Is that because, like right there,
Like this.
there's a piece and
Yeah.
then there's a gap and then there's another piece that looks like it's aligned with the
Yeah,
gap in
And I
between.
think in this particular case, this was a part of this section was not acquired yet, or the detail is to obtain this section of roadway.
So it's already hooked to something, it's just a little teeny piece.
Yeah, and
Okay.
this varies. These could either be new alignments that were told to us, completely new roadways, or filling in gaps, or just spot improvements at different areas.
Okay, so
Like
it's
for
gonna
instance, I know
depend on
this
the
one doesn't
project.
exist now. So extend to Smithfield,
Can we have different base maps we can choose from, like the aerial, if you go to the top right?
yeah.
Yeah, so these, when we went out, we kind of cast the net pretty wide. So some of them are, maybe there's a section of road that has never been built, or there's a section of road that's just undersized and the city's made improvements to both sides, and that's maybe just the piece that's left that needs those improvements. And we have some roads that are kind of just would be a whole new, there's never been anything there. And it's a whole new piece.
And sometimes it's fragmented because, you know, one jurisdiction said one thing and another said another. I mean, part of our planning effort is, you know, to kind of look at connectivity and continuity, so.
And so this is an example of one general one, right? It says it needs sidewalk, curb, signage, and potential traffic signals for this stretch of existing roadway, right? So so on the map, the whole roadway is highlighted and shown.
Were all of these projects in the cities already listed in each of the cities' master plans?
So what we did is we went and sat with each of the cities and said, tell us your needs.
Tell us what's in your master plan and or
Yeah.
other projects that.
We didn't really bound it to say it has to be part of your master plan. And it was really kind of from a wish list point of view, because, you know, after this, we'll go through a process of kind of prioritizing, fiscally constraining it. But at this point, we wanted to cast the net wide and identify needs. So we just said, what are your needs? And we tried to make it real simple for them, you know, just highlight a roadmap and tell us what it is, try to give us an idea of the nature of it. And that's what Eric and his folks did, is sort of through all that stuff, digitized it, put it all up here. So this is the whole wish list of all the jurisdictions at this point.
And we did receive feedback from every jurisdiction, I believe.
I probably ought to qualify that though. I did say, you know, think in terms of 30-year horizon. I mean, you know, when I asked the cities to kind of think in terms of, you know, don't give us, in other words, we said, don't give us every road in your jurisdiction, but give us the ones that are you see as the highest need.
I can kind of understand that, especially coming from different places within the country where I've lived, like Las Vegas was crazy. Yeah, you'd have a landing strip for a road and then a 2-lane bottleneck. And then it would just do this, it was crazy, traffic sucked. But that was their ordinances. The developer had to build this out in front of their project. But not down the road.
Do you want to move on to
Yeah,
prioritization or?
I think this is, our intent is to send this out to cities in this map form and get feedback. We'll also kind of have technical committee review it. But this is just the, the needs.
So in essence, back to Dave's question about this, the sparseness of some of those. In essence, down the road, we're gonna want to look at if there's gonna be a good idea to completely join the project with
Mhm.
something else.
I think they're, part of what we're looking at with this COG master plan is opportunities for connectivity or continuity. And so as we start to assemble this and figure it out, because we're operating on the assumption that you, the COG, want some sense of priority for these things. Does that make sense? If that's not the case, then we probably need to know it now, but that's what we're trying to do is say, okay, where do we get the most bang for the buck? And we're gonna go over a criteria that we're gonna screen these through, kind of a point scoring system to try to get to that. Is that, David, I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering why the railroad track was highlighted green. Is that a rails to trails project?
That would be, green's the active transportation, so like, if there was like a rail trail type project along the corridor.
Assuming the railway got abandoned.
Yeah, or maybe there's one next to it, or however that works out, but yeah, again, where we wouldn't just fund that, that would be one that has been screened out. So like I said, there were so many projects and we've already said, okay, these don't meet COG criteria, so we've already narrowed it down to. But this just helps show the vastness of the needs and what people think are important throughout the different jurisdictions.
If there's no questions, I think we go on there. Okay.
Yeah, as Jeff was saying, so to prioritize 120 plus projects potentially. We partially used Utah's transportation vision categories, which they've already established that that's their criteria statewide that UDOT and others use to help prioritize their projects. 4 categories are good health, better mobility, strong economy, and connected communities.
And the CMPO was involved at a statewide level in this process that kind of defined these guiding principles. So it's not just, I mean, you were giving input to this, but it's meant to be kind of a unified categorical vision of transportation in the state of Utah.
So
We don't have to embrace this.
well, actually, we do, in a way, because if we're gonna get, I know we're looking at our fund, but if we're gonna get some assistance from the state, they're gonna require us to follow this
Yeah, it
anyway.
doesn't hurt to be consistent.
You gotta be consistent.
But the reality is, I think as he goes through this is good stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense if you look at the, and it, how can you disagree with strong economy and connected communities? So I think the principles are sound. It's just how do we apply them?
Okay.
And those are the categories then within each. That's shown here. So we actually added one additional category that we call the implementation. And just discussion with Jeff and Jesse, and it seems like in a plan like this, that helps carry a little bit of weight. If the project's already been designed, or if it's already been planned, or if it shows up on other plans, maybe that gets a little higher prioritization because, it is ready to just go be constructed or something like that. So we added a 5th category, and then within each category, we have 2 subcategories, if you will. So under good health, we have safety and multimodal enhancements. Strong economy is accessibility and economic development. Better mobility is congestion relief and functional classification. Connected community is connectivity and consistency, and then under implementation, we have implementation readiness, and then the complexity of the project, so that includes. Well, we're gonna go through each of these and kind of give you an idea of what we'll be looking at for each category, so how the projects will be scored in the end.
What do we mean by accessibility? I'm assuming we're not talking about the traditional use of that word where it talks about like ADA access, or are we talking about just
More proximity to
connectivity?
activity centers,
Talking
yeah.
about Connectivity.
Yeah.
And that's the way they defined it at the statewide level too. We adopted that terminology. They're not talking about ADA.
Right.
It's not talking about.
No, it's not talking
No.
about ADA.
Okay, right. And so just to give an idea of different topics that we'll be looking for under each subcategory. So under safety, we'd look at rewarding projects that address already known safety issues or deficiencies, right? If the intersection has a really robust crash history in the last 5 years and includes fatalities or other serious crashes, that would be bumped a little higher than, say, a roadway widening that doesn't show an example of roadway crashes in the 5-year history or something like that. None of this is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm probably jumping here too much, but, you know, we've always had to struggle with maintenance projects, because, maintenance projects don't lend themselves to this kind of analysis. So, and most of those are in the rural area. So this process we're talking about, I don't know that we can really apply it to maintenance projects. So those maintenance projects probably need to be a category. We're not ignoring them. And of course, the set aside, the rural set aside helps address those. But just realize when we're doing this, you know, it's hard to differentiate a chip seal in Mendon versus one in Paradise. Does that make sense in this kind of thing? And so keep that in mind, that we're kind of setting on the shelf maintenance projects. We can talk about if we deal with them differently than we do now. And the way we deal with them now is just with the rule setting. But we'll have to discuss that.
Also under good health, under multimodal, we do want to reward projects that do include active transportation components that encourage good health in the community. So that could be anything connecting sidewalks, bike lanes, separated paths, trails, adjacent roadways, or whatever that may be. Under strong economy, so this is kind of the accessibility that you're asking about. So rewarding projects located in closer proximity to either educational facilities or visitor destinations, recreation areas, to get people out. Economic development would be rewarding projects that provide connections to employment or commercial areas. And we had the thought of using the activity centers that were defined by the CMPO in a previous project as kind of the basis of where that would be located. Under better mobility, obviously, if the project is providing congestion relief, whether that's in travel time or reliability. And then functional classification is strictly the size of roadways usually and how many people are being affected is what we're trying to capture there. Our arterial roads that carry 10 times the amount of traffic as a local road may receive a bump in prioritization as far as projects. Connected communities, so connectivity. If the project has elements that improve multimodal access and connectivity. Consistency is if the project's been already identified in a local plan or a regional plan. Planning efforts have already been completed or that were in line with those previous planning efforts. And then implementation is rewarding projects with preliminary design or engineering already completed. They're ready to go off the shelf, or the implementation complexity is rewarding projects that don't require additional right-of-way or other known issues or deficiencies that would have to be worked around in the project. It's an environmental issue or something else, complexity out there. I can go back to the summary. Any questions or comments here?
Yeah, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, just let me clarify the steering committee, because we have so many new mayors and stuff on board right now. as we've talked about, we've got our COG manual out there. This steering committee manual, you tell me if I'm wrong, did you? This could change the way we look at our manual. We could change our manual based on what we're doing here. So it's really important that we, as we look through this, that we recognize, okay, as we go through this, we're probably gonna want to restructure the manual and redo the way we're doing what we're doing right now. So when he says the roadways and stuff like that, a lot of times what we do right now with our manual, we focused on roadways. But in this, what they're looking at and what they're trying to present to us, a new way of looking at this is to broaden out what we're willing to fund as a COG. Is that correct? Am I summarizing this so they look at it
Yeah,
the right way?
you can throw out the whole old system and redo a whole new one based on this process or however you want to use this process. You can tweak it, just, add different elements. It's really up to you. One thing to keep in mind though is a bit of a timing issue. So, I have a hard time thinking that we can get through this process and stand it up and figure it all out by the time we need to kick off the next COG.
No, and I'm not,
So we may have to do another
yeah,
year.
I'm not
as-
pushing that.
Yeah,
As a steering committee,
yeah,
this could be long-term, looking at it and changing it down the road. Not necessarily next year. But as we're going through this, I think it's important we all look at it and say, okay. These guys are gonna bring to us some recommendations that are gonna change the way we're thinking about what we've been doing. And that's what I'm saying, we need to
No,
start,
you're-
it's not gonna be
you're spot
effective
on.
now. But over time, the steering committee, that's what we're gonna take back to the full COG, is our recommendations. This is where we think we need to take the COG. In the future.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Mayor. And you said this could broaden the projects that we apply the funds to. I was thinking it might help us to narrow it down, even if we used all of this criteria, just depending, like, I was just thinking as we went through, and if we changed our process to say you get points for all of these, and that could help narrow it down to projects that meet more of these criteria.
I think that's the intent. I think what he's talking about broadening is broadening maybe the gate where you let more like active transportation or,
Different types of projects.
yeah, I mean, is to get this. I don't know that it's possible that you have this plan, is deliver up the projects for the next 30 years. That's probably a little optimistic though. But yeah, it's to guide your decision making in a better informed way.
Yeah.
To get it down. Now the other thing to mention too is, there are other funding options, and we probably need to start having a discussion. There's different sales tax options that are available. Cache County has taken advantage of all of them except two. They call it the so-called second quarter, which I believe can go to both roads and transit. And then they call it a fifth quarter, which doesn't make sense how you got a fifth quarter. That's the legislature. And that goes to exclusively to transit.
Do you
So
think
there-
they didn't understand that there's not a, do you think that they're
They think they're the feds.
It's 5 options of
It's
quarters.
just bizarre.
Yeah.
But
They're all quarter
I will
percent.
tell you, I've had conversations with state legislators when we ask them and hire lobbyists to go pitch for state funds. And some of the first questions, have you implemented all your local option sales tax? And if they say no, they say, well, why, you're asking me, to raise taxes or whatever, so with this discussion, big picture, we can have a broader discussion, and the CMPO needs to have this too, of do we maybe try to pursue these other options that would add additional funding, particularly when you see those needs so great and it have be overwhelming, but those are a discussion for another day, but I just raise that to you that there are other options.
So can you just run through real quick which ones we have now, and these other two that you're mentioning would add another 0.5 cent sales tax?
Percent.
What's that?
Both
Half
of-
percent. So right now the call collects 1/4%. So when you go to the store and it's 7.25%, a quarter of that's coming back to the COG. So there's another 0.5% sales tax.
So if
So
That could be.
if you're in a city that's 7.25 and we did both of those, it'd go to 7.75.
yeah, I think that would be accurate. So the first, so-called first quarter, and it's complex because there's two options within each of the quarters, but the first quarter, the CBTD is in most cities, that takes the first quarter. The second quarter, we haven't implemented, and I think there's an option
We have not.
we have not implemented. There's an option to have it be both all to transit or to, and the transit district actually went after that second quarter a number of years ago and the voters turned it down. But I think there's a road or a hybrid mix there in that second quarter that can be done. And I think it might only require county council approval. I don't think they have to go to a voter ballot anymore. And then the third quarter we've implemented, that's this, the COG. That's what funds the COG. The fourth quarter, the county implemented a number of years ago, and that just gets formula distributed to all the cities and to the county and the transit district. And the county implemented that by ordinance and the county council. That is in place. And then the fifth quarter is one that can only be implemented if you've implemented all of the other ones. And it, at this point, goes exclusively to transit. And it's scheduled to sunset next year, but it sounds like the legislature is going to change that and allow that deadline to not hit. So though, yeah, those would be additional 0.25% for potential for the second and the fifth.
So what is that translate to dollar?
Well, our 0.25% generates about $7
million
a year
So you would get another 7 or 8.
for each of those.
So here's, and part of my ignorance, I'm trying to get my mind around all this stuff, because I know when I came in, I
They're
know
trying to
that.
get you recorded supporting the sales tax. That's what
Yeah,
they're trying to do.
yeah, well,
A sales tax increase.
everybody
No, I'm
wants,
just kidding.
everybody wants elected officials to get recorded approving increase, but. Here's my question. Like, I'm just trying to get my mind around this. The way the COG has traditionally operated is that the funds would only go for collector streets. Like there was no real funding outside of a collector street.
Collector above, so it
Or
can't be a
above.
local road.
Within the CMPO bound,
Yeah.
within the CMPO.
But what we're saying here is that there's gonna be a shift from that. Is that not correct?
Not necessarily. We're just saying that there's other funding sources. And this master plan effort also does not suggest a shift in that. And in
Okay.
fact, that's set by state code. In the urban area, funding can only go to collector class roads or above. In the rural area, they can go on any road.
And collector is 66 foot right away.
Well, there's.
Little bit different for everybody.
It's.
Because River Heights, we've got some 40-foot right of ways, and great collector roads.
Yeah, I mean,
No one laughed, but yeah.
UDOT has a process for the state where they classify roadways. And we usually key off there unless with some wiggle room to say if your master plan. So it's kind of squishy of what a collector road is, and it's kind of what it is in your master plan, but they're typically a little wider road, more functional.
Or your roads are really moving your traffic. They're not the ones that your cul-de-sacs or like that. It's how are you getting people through your city, gathering them and getting them out, or gathering and getting them in. Those are more of your collector type roads.
Okay, and then the, I guess the other question that I would have is, so this is gonna, so basically this would just add another $7 to $8 million if that tax were implemented, that could go towards this mass amount of projects. Do we have a tabulation of how much in projects we, I mean, you're jokingly saying billions, but.
It's a lot, but I need to say, I haven't got into the state code yet to see how that second quarter operates. Whether it would be allowed to roll into this one, or whether it has, maybe it might just distribute out to cities like that. I need to dig into that, so.
That's beyond the scope of that.
but-
Yeah,
All right,
sorry.
That's not.
No, I think right, like we're talking about whether this is gonna kind of narrow them down, right? The main thing that we need to buy off on you guys for as that steering committee and likely to be active cog is, are we going in the right direction with these being how we're ranking the projects?
Right.
Did we miss something? Is there, you're like, you know, what, that's not important. We don't care if this is an item, or, hey, we feel you guys missed one and we really think the project should be getting points if they involve, if they have this or it's that. That's where we need the help from you, because we have those 100 and something projects. How do you rank those and come up with maybe the top 25 or 50 projects? Because again, we may be 10 or 20 years at our funding rate to fund all those. So how are we gonna say the COG feels like this should be the focus? And are these categories the right ones, or did we miss the shot completely? Or you're like, they look great, go for it?
The only thing I could think of, and we've done it in previous COGs, and maybe it's covered in one of these categories, is, you know, points or kudos for planning ahead, you know, preserving that right away, buying that right away early before it costs too much. We kind of have that right away extra points right now in the scoring,
Preserve.
10 years are out.
Advanced
Um,
reservation.
yeah, I don't know if there's a way to, you know, give a project extra points if the city's really being ahead of the game on some of these preserving.
Yeah, we need to start looking at, one
That's a
thing I
good
know
idea.
something last time we just went around. Is we were doing some projects and trying to fund some projects that really should have been carried by the developers. And we gotta start looking at that and start saying, we gotta reward communities are saying that are pushing onto the developers when they want to develop and improve something, they take care of it and they do it. We support them, but we gotta start pushing that onto the developers and saying, you're gonna build this subdivision here. You need to develop the road and the thoroughfare so it'll handle it. Not the COG.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, most of the time, like
That's-
the frontage and stuff, but sometimes the farther you go away from the project, the more state code.
But that's what he's trying to say, and that's what I agree with.
Expansion.
We reward those communities for doing that.
Yeah,
But expansion.
Yeah, we can think through maybe a way to do that.
Cause that's how you end up with a lot of what he's talking about, you got these
Expansion.
great spots and then it gets really crappy and then you got these great spots.
yeah, and
But we'd much rather have some great spots and some crappy spots and have the COG fund the crappy spots while the developers are funding the other, right?
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a pure timing issue, you know, if we
Yeah,
come
we-
first and we need to do a project. Then we don't have any leverage to get dedication. We gotta buy right away from the property owner. If they come first, then you can leverage that. Now you often can't leverage. Let's say you need a 100-foot road, it's not fair to put that all on the developer, but you certainly can get 66 feet. And keep their buildings out of that 100 feet, and that still allows you, when you come back to do a project, you may have to buy some additional property, but. So you have to have that proportionality thing in mind, but you're right, I think. I've struggled over the years of, boy, if we just waited on this, the developer's gonna build this, and they know that sometimes. And they wait it out and say,
Well, hindsight's 20/20, and that's where the COG come in to fix the hindsight,
yeah,
where this was not in play right then, so we need to fix it. Then we can come in and fix that.
but with all these things, it is a bit of a struggle. Cause it's good in concept to say, let's do that, but then how do you translate it to a point scoring system, and what data do you need, and who's gonna be mad that you interpret it one way versus the other? There's a lot of ambiguities in these, but I think it's good to note that that's a principle that we ought to try to encourage. And sorry, we probably don't let you guys crank.
yeah, if we get too sidetracked.
No,
we're kind of on a time.
It's very
We're gonna
good.
be for so long.
Now, to give you some context, you mentioned $1 billion problem. We're not quite $1 billion. But we're pretty darn close when you add up all the project requests. And so when you're talking 8 million a year,
You got a long road to hoe.
you got a long road. And so that's why it's important to really focus on what projects are the most effective. And that's the whole purpose of this scoring criteria. So, 8 million over 30 years is, and costs are gonna go up too, right? So we're talking maybe a quarter of what the needs are identified right now. let alone that are more that are gonna be identified over the course of the next. 30
So you
years.
folks have the capability of helping us come up with a scoring system, don't you?
Yeah, so,
Okay,
yeah, so maybe switch over, first, we're gonna have you do a homework assignment.
okay.
Okay, so y'all have this paper here, it's called the COG Transportation Master Plan Conference Sum Paired Comparison.
We have extras.
Right here.
Mine's missing. Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, so within this, we've got each of the kind of the criteria that Eric has gone over: good health, strong economy, better mobility, connected community, implementation, et cetera. So this table below lists each of those, on the left and the right, we're matching each of those with each other. Okay, so we want you to take a couple minutes and we're gonna give you 20 points. And we want you to say, allocate those 20 points to one criteria or the other. Oops. Did we disappear? So we're gonna, for row one, we're gonna give you 20 points and you say, what's the relative importance of implementation versus good health? And if good health or if implementation is 3 times more important than good health, you would give implementation 15 points and good health 5 points.
And the intent of this is it not to get to the weighting of the criteria.
Exactly.
And one of the things too, and I don't know if they touched on it, but you had brought up like implementation too, might also discuss the COG corridors that the COG's already put money on. Right, so you look at Nibley, we funded 4 of their 5 phases. That's probably a high priority. If the COG's already devoted $5 or $6 million to that corridor, why not finish the
Or
little bit?
would this also be the implementation that you're referring to that, hey, the city's already done a lot of.
They've got the core,
Exactly.
they've got, you
Yeah,
look at
okay.
400 North and the city's already worked through the right of way acquisition.
Yeah.
Now it's just the road, so.
Yeah. And for example, our criteria right now, implementation is reward projects with preliminary design or engineering already completed, or those that don't require acquisition of additional right of way. We could modify that to be acquisition of right of way well in advance of a project. That could be another one of the criteria. So we have some opportunity to tweak this, but we're trying to get now is kind of a relative importance of each of these criteria. So we start to see as we apply the scoring, some differentiation. So can we give you 5 minutes to pull out your pen and then while you're, once we get that, we'll collect it and we'll tally it and we'll show you the results of that.
So each row is 20 available points.
Exactly.
Each
Right.
matchup, if you will, we're teaming them against each other.
So we're scoring this based on every possible project.
These are the criteria, the categories, right? Yeah, the thinking is that the criteria would be applied to all the projects, the same criteria.
Excluding maintenance, like we talked.
20 cents per line.
Per
row.
Per row.
Yep.
So you have 5 and 15, 10 and 10, 20 0.
And if everything should be weighted exactly equal, you do tens all up and down. And all this stuff.
Kind of like.
So if you don't want to think really hard, just do tens.
If you don't want to think really hard,
Okay.
you want everything the
Okay.
same, you feel like, hey, let's,
There
It's
you
not
go.
gonna help them.
Yeah, but if you think this
Isn't
one
all
item is
10s
very
equal to-
important, then you rank it high on
Exactly.
all.
Yeah,
That's
if you
exactly
feel
right.
safety is the most important, it should receive higher scores in every match.
It's kind of hard because it's like asking you to rank your favorite kids.
some of it,
It
that's easy
depends
to
on the
do.
day. It really depends on the day.
It sure does.
Spreadsheet. I have it.
I don't,
But,
no,
Yeah.
It's hard.
You're fine.
I went through mine and. I guess myself. That was right.
All important.
Yeah, they are.
Subjective. In certain times.
Yeah. We have a couple more out, right?
Yeah, there's still a few.
I'm ready to do my math wrong.
So on here, Mayor.
I
We
did
got a
this wrong
spreadsheet.
anyway.
So here,
So,
like implementation versus good health, these two should equal 20.
These should what?
These two boxes need to equal 20.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you're doing,
I did do it wrong.
here, I'll just give you, here's a clean one. So, right, if this one's, however you want to divvy those 20 points up between implementation and good health. Does that make sense?
I think so.
So, right, so here where they have 5 and 15.
So I started off with better mobility. And well, I didn't see another subcategory for better mobility other than strong economy.
Yeah, so better mobility. So you're comparing these two.
Yeah,
So versus implementation and good health, which is more important to you? Do you feel it's more important?
okay, so actually. Better mobility up here. Let's cross that out. I probably have too many
Right.
points in there anyway.
So there, the points this way don't matter. You're doing points this
It's
way,
this way.
and you want 20 points each line.
Okay, so I like
So if you,
something like that.
yeah, that's what you're gonna go for all those rows. So you're just comparing the different options
Gotcha.
and ranking them. that way.
Okay, thank you. 20. Okay, mobility. 15. And
Okay, while he's doing that, I think, they'll tally those up and we'll come back to that, but maybe, Eric, can I still your monitor? And then let's just kind of look at a little bit more of the criteria. And kind of, we have ideas on thoughts, how those should be from the bottom. Yeah.
So we have a little experience in applying a criteria to projects, right, with the CPAC. It's pretty narrow, but it's for a few categories. And it's a challenge to get a system that's simple enough. Because you can kind of make them crazy where you need all sorts of data. And particularly when you're talking all different types of projects. You know, some projects that are existing roads, some roads that don't even exist. And so I'll preface this by saying it's a challenge to kind of get that balance of how do you keep it simple enough that it doesn't collapse on its own weight of having so much ambiguity, but how do you get it, you know, to where it really gets you what you want to get? What, does that make sense? And the devil's in the detail, because it's easy to say these big principles, but then at some point, you got to get down to, okay, what's the actual criteria? How many crashes or what do you look at, or what data do you need? And it gets to be a challenge, and we'll have to work through that. But it's kind of striking that balance between having it simple enough that it's manageable and still get you what you want. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we'll just give you some examples of of how this might look here. So going on safety, and I guess I didn't hear any concerns about the general categories consistent with, the UDOT, so everybody's good with the general categories it's the devil's in the details, right? Okay. So if we look at here, safety, reward projects that address a known safety issues or deficiency. And this is draft, for consideration and discussion here. A project that is in a location that had one or more crashes, or that had one or more, just any type of crash would just get 1 point. If that crash was an injury crash, it would get 2 points. And if it was a fatal crash, it would get 3 points.
Or serious injury.
Or serious injury. Fatal or serious injury would get 3 points. So you see how we're trying to put the weight of the project on those where the issue has been observed or identified. Okay. Any thoughts regarding that particular criteria? Does that one seem to make sense?
And this criteria is just what you've established over time.
This is what we've come up with,
Come up.
working between staff and the consultant, so now this is where we're coming to you guys as the elected officials. And kind of ones that when you take it to the COG to say, hey, this has gone through the steering committee, they think this is good. Not just us sitting in a room, the four of us deciding, we like this, we like that, we could do that all day, but we want you guys to buy in on this criteria and then run the projects through that process and say, does this make sense? Does this, or hey, this looks bad, where did we mess up?
And with your permission, we'd like to run this through the technical committee that we have before we finalize anything as well.
But as you've done this, did you take into consideration? Okay, safety is paramount in every industry. But safety comes about because of behavior. An individual's behavior causes a safety concern. So what I'm hearing here is you're lining this to crashes, but where have we looked at what caused those crashes? Did mobility cause those crashes? Did the way it's structured and engineered cause those crashes? Where are we taking that into consideration? Because that's, if you remove some of that, people's behavior is automatically going to change. You increase their mobility going through a stoplight, so they have to beat that yellow light. That's going to change.
Yeah, so what we could, instead of make it focused on what the crash history has been, we could refashion to focus on what are the safety elements that are included with the project. So if
Okay.
it's, a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, or it's, enhanced signage, or if it's a roundabout, or if it's, those sorts of kind of the proven safety countermeasures.
If you do crashes, there's too many unknowns.
And it's hard to try to find as we narrow, sorry, David, as we try to narrow things, because we don't know what all the full designs look like, right? We're going on a very
I
preliminary,
get that.
this road needs something, and we don't always know what the extents of those projects are, because we're at a very preliminary level here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because what if there were an intersection where there was a fatality, but it was because of a drunk driver? Versus another intersection where there's been a fatality because of an engineering problem.
Well, the other thing I've had this said is how many people have to die before this project happens? And I don't want that to be goal driven. Let's let somebody die first and then we'll do the project. So I think it's better to have it.
Or you
So,
have the
that
alternate
way.
of that, they go ahead and make the change because one person died, and 3 more died because of the changing.
I like
So
the other. idea.
So
Conversation is something that UDOT's, and we all struggle with them.
I
How
know.
do you, and there is actually a methodology, and it's called US RAP. It's a group that has kind of pioneered predictive safety planning. So they have there's a system where you can input roadway characteristics, and it's data intensive. We've actually digitized some of our roads in Cache County already for that effort, where in this case, they hired students at the University of Utah that use Google Street View, and they went every segment and digitized input what roadway characteristics are there. And then they could connect those to what they call crash modification factors or things that are improving. So that's how you get to a real predictive way to say, okay, this road has characteristics that make it unsafe based on, engineering knowledge. And, you know, this type of crash modification factor could improve that. The problem with that is that I'm actually supportive of trying to do that, but that's almost a process in and of itself. And the CMPO's applied for a grant called Safe Streets for All, where we hope to be able to do that. And then you can move to what you said, where you're not just using past data to say, okay, let's do something, which is, you need to do that. But that US RAP process allows you to kind of get in more predictive, and UDOT kind of uses that. But it's a bit of a monster once you create it in terms of data inputs to be able to do that. But that's the only way I can really think in a systematic way to get to what you're talking about. Of, you know, what can we do to, you know, proactively to predict things ahead? Does that make sense?
Yeah. But what I want to come out of this as well myself is for the steering committee, all of us, none of us are have a career in roads and what these individuals have here. So we need to be able to ask the questions and have them give us the answers so we know if we can agree with them or not. And that's what I hope all of us will do here, just like I just did there. I know that with crashes, there's behavior behind them that cause something.
Yes,
And we gotta address.
and what you're trying to do is design a roadway that reduces the chances of injury when people do make mistakes.
Right.
Because you know you won't eliminate
Exactly.
mistakes, right? But you want the roadway to be forgiving enough, you know, and signage, you know, clear enough, you know, to try and mitigate, you know, reduce the incidence of those mistakes and those errors.
So that,
Jesse, if we get in the weeds too much, you can say, well, you get too far in the weeds.
Yeah.
I
Well,
get that.
you know, we struggle with the same thing for the CTAC criteria for safety, if you remember. All the,
Yeah.
you know, how you do, and how we ended up doing that is just saying, let's hire an expert who knows safety, and he, from a third party, can kind of score the project. Because they get so squishy, and, you know, how do you, and we could do that maybe with this, is how, I don't.
It's just, yeah, the hard part when we get into this is, right, even when we're ranking the 10 projects for the COG, that comes at a cost and at 50 or 60 hours for 10 projects. When you're looking at 100 projects, we're looking at the scale to go in and do more in-depth things. So let's try to come up with a scoring matrix that's simple enough that you can quickly kind of look at a project real quick and assign a point value. If you're spending half an hour to assign points to everything for 12 categories, it's gonna take it's gonna take $8 million to pay these guys to do that. So
here's just a question, right? You know, this is a very subjective, I mean, it's subjective because of the behavior, right? Now, from your guys' perspective, I don't know the answer to this question, but couldn't you go through and when you go to a road or to an intersection, couldn't you go through and say, hey, there's 10 security factors we're looking for here, 10 of them. And of those 10, there are these are these safety shortfalls.
Yeah.
And weigh it based off of, and bring that back to the steering committee and say, hey, these are the criteria we're going to weigh against. And for this particular project, there's 3 out of these 7 security concerns that we have here. So then that's where we derive the points versus off of a subjective data that is, you know,
and you could do, you know, criteria like, does it, you know, what are the pedestrian enhancements it includes, you know, what is the design speed, what is the, you know, does it include adequate shoulders, things like that. Where was I going with that? Where I could see that getting difficult is in some of the projects are advanced corridor preservation, right? There's not a road, you're connecting the communities. And it's difficult for no matter how, because it's not a road, therefore there's been no safety issues.
no accidents, nor.
Per the data, if you construct a road, you're decreasing safety because there will be a crash.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, you know, it's gonna take some nuance and maybe, I don't know, we'll have to figure out how to not penalize, you know, some projects that we know are common sense, but
you could have 2 separate safety criteria,
We
one
could,
for
one
a
for
current
advanced,
road and one for one that is not there, right?
right, yeah.
So,
Or not apply the safety to a road that's not there and
That's exactly right.
not weight it not penalize it per se, as a thing. So, okay, so yeah, we'll do some more thinking with that, but I understand kind of your point there. And maybe it's a hybrid, where we don't want to be chasing the crashes, but we do want to be addressing where we know that we have experienced crashes as well. So.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so let's go to multimodal enhancements. The next one, projects that reward projects that include active transportation facilities, sidewalks, bike lanes, separated shared use paths, etc. And this is, and maybe, tell me what the COG rules, if you have a roadway and it has a shared use path that's separated from a roadway parallel to it, that would be,
That's still.
that's still eligible. Okay. So here we have widened shoulders, if it's a basic project, you're just widening the shoulders, some intersection improvements without dedicated facilities, you just get 1 point. Or maybe no points.
Yeah.
In that case, if you're doing, protected facilities, maybe it's got a buffered bike lane or something to offer some separation, you get 2 points. And if it's completely separated from the roadway, a pathway that's running adjacent to the road where cars can't up the curb and, and conflict with pedestrians and bicycles, that gets 3 points.
I like, that's what I was gonna make the recommendation you just made. I think widening is just 0.
Yeah.
Protected facilities, bike lanes is 2, and maybe just regular sidewalks is on the 2 level. And then 3 should maybe be reserved for just like a 10-foot or 8-foot or wider separated path or something. Just try to distinguish, because in my mind, a standard 4-foot sidewalk is not the
Yeah.
same as a multimodal
Right,
path. They shouldn't
okay.
be the same.
So add a criteria here, 0 if it's not really doing anything, and then add a
I don't know
1
if I agree with you.
for
You're
sidewalk.
considering just like Logan. When you get in the out areas and stuff like that, widen road to shoulders. That's pretty much all you can do at points. So you do need a point for that, because that's gonna give, if you widen the road to shoulders, that gives the bikes outside of the, in rural areas, a place for a bike to ride without a designate, because you can't afford to put bike routes all through this valley.
True. I guess we just needed to define what does widen mean, and does your example, does that fall into the bike lanes that you would get 2 points because you widened it for a bike area, so.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
So
Then is it, I guess with that one too.
I don't disagree, but we just gotta put some criteria. And maybe that's just,
Like that.
We are
maybe
talking
maybe
rural
that's too big.
areas too here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but relates to
saying.
congestion.
So, Mayor, we are talking rural areas. We've set aside the maintenance projects. If there's capacity projects in the rural area, which there are some, then they go through this. The maintenance projects,
Yeah.
so chip seal, we're not running them through this. We're gonna have to deal with those as a category unless you tell us otherwise. But it's a struggle to run them through this.
Okay.
And I wonder on there, just where we're talking about, right, like, you use the word protected, but right in Clarkston, maybe they just have 6-foot shoulders for their bike lanes. Is
Yeah, in my mind,
protected the right
yeah.
word, or, right, in
Yeah,
Logan
that's-
and Nibley, so maybe a little different situation than we get out in.
Yeah,
that's
I mean-
really like, I like to see some rural communities out that way do. It's pushed towards a shoulder out there. You can't really have a bike lane off the side. You can't really put a rumble strip in. You can't really put a curb in. You just want to give them some room, but yet not impede traffic at the same time.
Yeah, you wanna have a 10-12-foot lane with a 6-foot shoulder,
Yeah,
so that there's plenty of room for the cyclists to get out of traffic.
and that's what I try to push in a lot of our areas around there is just exactly that.
I like that, yeah.
4 to 6 foot shoulder,
Yeah.
enough, okay. Okay, good on this one now,
Yeah.
okay, accessibility. Reward projects located in proximity to educational facilities and recreational visitor destinations. So we have one point within a mile. And I have no idea what kind of the scale, if that's really gonna.
Encompass everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's gonna be a little fluid.
Yeah.
We may apply this criteria and no projects
adjust.
qualify, and so we
You're
expand it.
10
you know.
through and it's like, that didn't work.
Yeah,
We'll adjust
adjust.
just criteria.
this was just to get our minds.
Is there anything else? Right now, we've got it kind of distance based, and if it's adjacent to or within a quarter mile, if it's touching it, then that gets. Any other thoughts how we might reward projects in proximity to education facilities or recreational destinations.
The only thought that's coming to mind, I don't know if there's a better way, like take Hiram, for instance. There's roads that serve the canyon that, you know, the recreation facility is 10 miles up the canyon. But the road is directly serving the traffic there. There's probably a lot of examples of that it's a direct route to it, but the actual activity is very far away.
Okay,
I don't know how you cover that.
so maybe
Yeah, right, you have 101 that runs all the way
Yeah.
to Maine, and goes all up the canyon, but everything's at the top of it.
I almost
know,
wonder if you
maybe we
could
need-
merge the two and just call it access to opportunity, and that includes both educational facilities, recreation, as well as commercial employment centers.
You know, in my mind, I'd want to look at that as, I know you're rewarding the project, you're trying to rank them. I'm gonna rank them higher if they've taken some pretty good steps. Because if it is a school or a recreation, there's gonna be a lot of traffic coming in and out of there. Is that, am I not thinking of that right? I'm saying, I'm gonna want them to reward them based on how that they've addressed that situation. So if they're close to school. You're gonna wanna make sure they've addressed the roads that they're gonna be developing there, and they've got them, it's gonna create good flow of traffic, but yet safety. That looking too much in the weeds?
We can try.
And I think so.
That's appropriate.
And I think some of that ought to come as they submit their projects, right? Are they addressing that? But as we start to look, oh, look, this road provides to tons of industry. There's lots of employees that use this road every day to work. That's, we're saying those are more important. Or, well, this is the road that takes to get to school. That's higher priority than some neighborhood road with 20 houses on it. How do we rank that? But then, yes, once it comes in to be built, or we need to make sure they're addressing all those design standards. Is
Yeah.
it safe for being in school? Is it safe for this?
That's, you got it right there.
But like I said, some of that we will see,
Address the design standards.
and we won't see
for
that
that area.
till maybe is outside of the scope of what this plan would do. We'd just be looking at when they come for the actual funds to make sure they have a well-rounded design.
One other thing that I wondered on this is if we should try to somehow introduce some way to acknowledge the needs of freight. And how, because freight has a strong connection to economic strength. So somehow looking at, what corridors are needed as are critical freight corridors. And have lots of truck traffic on them, and I mean, if you're trying to support the economy, we know that from Hiram's case, the West Point Dairy and E.A. Miller, I mean, they're struggling with their expansion plans because there's not the freight capacity to accommodate it, so I don't know how we could do it, but if you wanted to, we could look at maybe a way to include freight as part of the strong economy.
I think that's just as vital.
Yeah, and it could be. We could incorporate freight destinations if there's, warehousing or manufacturing or something like that, as one of these.
Brad's actually doing a freight study, but it's not gonna be done. Well, it might be done. in time for
Bragg
this.
is, you say?
Bragg is, yeah, Laura. She's got a lot of data on the movements of freight.
I think some of those smaller jurisdictions too, like you have Lewiston, that's one of their complaints is everything comes from Idaho, comes through their town. Right, so maybe they don't get a lot of residential traffic, but they're like, we're getting 7 o'clock in the morning, we got semi after semi rolling through our town.
Yeah, you got municipalities, I'll bet you, in your municipality there, you never ever considered the fact of what you're gonna have to deal with as far as freight and stuff like that over the years. And now all of a sudden, many of us are looking at that. I've never in my lifetime thought in Clarksville, 300 West, I'd have a traffic backup at a stop sign, and I got it every morning when 5 years open, they're back clear up the street coming through there. So why don't we address it? And that's gonna have to be something.
Okay, moving on, better mobility category. Is reward projects resulting in improvements in travel time and reliability. And we're using here what we call a volume to capacity ratio. That's primarily a modeling output from the travel demand model. A volume to capacity ratio of above 1 is gridlock. You know, there's more volume than can be accommodated. 0.9 is congested conditions, you know, 0.6 to 0.7 is, you know, typical busy corridor. So
That's
how
what I
we,
just described. That's exactly what I'm talking right there.
okay,
That's something we have never had to consider, and we've got to start considering with the new roads and stuff that are coming in.
right. Any other comments on that one?
That one seemed pretty cut and dry.
Okay, functional classification, the reward projects and higher classified roads. This is consistent with the statewide functional classification system, which is based on federal guidance from the Federal Highway Administration. And so we have our principal arterials, which are your main highways, your 91, 89, et cetera. And then on down principal arterials, and then major arterials, and then collector streets, which are you know, kind of connecting to the arterials and gathering traffic from you know, the areas and connecting to their arterials, and you have your local streets, which is your residential. So we're saying focus projects on your arterials receives the highest points. And then if it's just a local, you would get 1 point.
Now, most of our arterials in Cache County are state facilities.
Mhm.
There's a few that aren't.
And we would not expend COG funding on the state facility.
We're
So
not
is there-
prohibited from doing it, and other counties do put COG money to try to incentivize UDOT to put money on projects, but typically we have not put any of our COG money on state roads.
The only, not on state roads, but we have on state involved intersections,
Yeah. we do
right?
have
So
that.
there's those, we haven't necessarily done like SR 30, but when there's
Just
two
Smithville
local,
one or 3200 south.
and there's the right turn lane there and Millville, and I know that, is it Amalga that has intersection issues, so with some of those lanes.
This poses an interesting question. Because UDOT has agreed to expend funds specifically in Logan. Outside of UDOT roads.
To alleviate.
To alleviate
Main
pressure on Main Street. So it would just lead me to wonder, right, and I don't know if we can put that as a criteria in here, the state probably won't like that, right? But a criteria is there, and we can code it however we want, is there UDOT funding that we could get from this because it alleviates pressure on Main Street? Or based on what UDOT's agreed to do?
Actually, that's a really good idea. I've seen other MPOs that are, you know, going through similar processes where they will allocate their local funding to leverage the state funding as a local match, or, you know, they'll do the environmental work and say, hey, we'll get this project going, anticipating the state would come in later to.
So I don't know if there's a way we can build that in here. That's gonna fall on some very specific roads.
Mhm.
And they're gonna be very specific projects, but I think that would be.
And how would you phrase that?
Well, so I think your point is good. So some of the roads, so UDOT is studying, they got a Main Street problem. What are some things to fix it? They know that there's not much you can do to Main Street. You can't widen it. You can't build a double decker or whatever. And so the only option is to look at other parallel routes. UDOT is committed and said, if that fixes Main Street, even though those roads aren't state roads, we'll help with it. Some of those roads are already in here, you know, that we're looking at. They're gonna be evaluating those projects through the lens of what does it do to Main Street. The COG has got its own lens. I mean, I think the hope is that we see where they come together, because I suspect as those projects emerge from the UDOT process, you know, even though they're willing to put money on it, they would look for us to put money on them as well. So I'm hoping that these plans kind of converge, and does that make sense? but some of it's a timing
Canal crossings that
issue.
are right off of the
Yeah, I
highway.
just would hope that we don't go fund a project that
Funds
UDOT will fund.
Canal
Yeah.
crossings that
And
are
that's where you
right
guys are
close
gonna
to
have, we're gonna count on you for a lot of
roadway.
oversight
Yeah.
and.
They don't do that
and
anymore.
help.
They used to.
And some of that's kind of a political leverage. And we funded a project, the first west punch through, that probably would have been
Yeah,
one that
crossings
UDOT could have
too narrow.
funded for Main Street. But it was kind of a commitment to try to suggest to UDOT and the commission, hey, we're trying to solve our problems as well. And we're part of this. Does that make sense? So I think there'll be opportunities as these plans come together to kind of talk about what you're talking about
There
there.
has to be a.
Or should we not fund this because UDOT can fund it? Or should we allocate money there and say, we'll allocate $1 million if UDOT will fund the rest? I mean, we can strategize about that. But I think until
I think.
both these planning processes mature a little bit, we won't have that opportunity.
For
Sorry.
example, UDOT will look at Logan City and say, okay, we're gonna help you with these two roads here to take traffic off of here. But what they're not taking into consideration, the municipalities close by like North Logan and River Heights and saying, you know, you just impacted my road here with what you did. You probably need to expand your vision. I think we need to get them to start looking beyond just their current vision, because I sometimes don't believe they understand. I know they don't. When you say Logan City, they think that's from the mouth of the canyon all the way to Smithfield. And it's not.
Yeah.
Moving on, connected communities, reward projects with elements that improve multimodal access and connectivity. So we've got here, no connections. Not sure why that project would be in there if there's minor connection, including with a local collector street, a major connection, if it's connecting to arterials, or 3 points if it's connecting with active transportation facilities. I think this, I'm not convinced that we've nailed this one. This seems a little bit awkward to me, so I think maybe the corridor preservation, maybe this is an opportunity for the corridor, I think that's a good idea, the corridor.
But some of this is like what I think Mayor Monson pointed out, where where there's roads that are planned, but there's a gap between them all, and sometimes those roads, in terms of bang for your buck, just connecting, and it's just like 3100 North in North Logan, having that connection. I mean, those where they're missing, or even like Wolfpack Way going north, there's not a lot of ways to get north and south off of Main Street. So I think looking at those things where there's missing gaps of roads where you can connect, and how you get at that, I don't know. And maybe it's just I mean, it when you see it, but it's hard to maybe define it with the criteria.
Does it require land purchase?
Well, I mean, it may well, but
It's following.
Oh,
sorry,
but I think it's just of the roads that are in there, let's sort through them and say which ones provide that critical connection.
Right.
And those that do,
Okay.
we ought to give a bonus.
Yeah.
For.
Part of that might even be looking at like redundancy, because I know there's some spots where right we get into the county and there's two roads, or there's one's a state road and one's a county facility. And if one of those closes, then the detour is now a 30-minute detour. Right? When we're impacting one road, do we have that redundancy, that connectivity of, one block over, we punch another road and make that connection, we've solved an issue.
Okay, so I think that's some good ideas on connectivity. This one's pretty straightforward, is reward projects that are consistent with state, county, or local transportation master plans. 0 points if it's never been proposed or documented. 1 point if it's in a city plan. 2 points if it's also in a MPO county plan, and 3 if it's in multiple plans. So,
I would probably take CMPO off of that. And the reason I say that is, you know, we are using this process to define our CMPO plan.
okay,
At this point, the county, as far as like, I mean, we're working on our own transportation master plan, but it doesn't have a. I don't know if it would really be weighted any stronger than the city transportation master plans.
so it's,
Because there's not really a county-wide, the county has our individual for our,
More just a yes, no.
Yeah. that's-
yeah, it might have to
Yeah.
be back to a,
they're
a
both-
yes,
they're the
no,
Same
or,
thing, basically.
or is
one
there a
or
way
three,
that,
you know, or some.
yeah, right, some, right, if we're in this, in the process of updating ours, because we haven't had one in the last 10 years, how does that affect? There might be a little more to look at that one.
And did you say all of these points are gonna be weighted based on the exercise we did?
Yeah, per the category that it's, yeah, correct.
Okay.
Sorry, one more,
Yeah.
maybe like. If it's noted on multiple cities plans, like for instance, if Logan Cities and River Heights are matching. That's a criteria for like, hey, we've got multiple communities identifying the same, I don't know if there's a way to add that.
Yeah, I think that, you get that too between Hiram, the county and Nibley, you start to see when Nibley shows it within their jurisdiction,
two
the county
adjoining-
of Hiram picks it up
Adjoining
too.
jurisdictions have the same plan.
Yeah,
It's on multiple jurisdictions, it gets bonus.
so I think you move that to a 3. You know, and so this is noted if it's in a city or county plan, and then if it's in multiple
It's showing.
of those.
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's not multiple plans for the same jurisdiction, but it's multiple
Right.
jurisdictional plans.
North Logan, Smithfield County again showing at Hyde Park, oh, that spans multiple jurisdictions, everyone seems to be on the same page that.
Just call that multiple plan consistency.
Yeah,
consistencies, yeah, exactly.
I think that's a good.
yep, that's good. Okay, anything else on that criteria? Okay, so we got 2 more here, implementation. Reward projects with preliminary design or engineering completed. And then reward projects that don't require acquisition of right of way is what that's intended to be.
So I've been thinking about this more. I wonder if we should even have that readiness criteria. I mean, that's a big deal when you get to a COG funding round to know that it's ready. But for a planning exercise where it's a 30-year plan, you know, I don't know that does it make sense to reward a couple projects that might have, because you don't usually do engineering on a project till you're ready to move on it, you know, and so it seems like it penalized a lot of projects unnecessarily. I do like the complexity thing. You know, if it's a simpler project, less right of way, that makes sense, but I don't know about having design readiness.
Yeah.
It's because it's gonna be a snapshot of this year for 30 years of plans.
Right, yeah.
I agree that
I think we need to have it as part of our ongoing COG scoring, but not for a planning exercise.
Is there a different implementation criteria that would facilitate, you know, is it? You know, corridor preservation that may come into play here, we don't want to double count it, but it may be here, it may be up at the
Is there some,
connected communities, is there another?
is this where you do stuff like if the COG's already funded something on that corridor, that phase?
Yeah, that
right?
would be thought,
If it's
yeah.
phased, if it's, right, we just did the Millville, like some engineering for Millville, we did some engineering corridor for North Logan, Nibley's got a couple phases. The county's got some phases where we've already said, this is important enough to fund once. If we pull out now, are we just leaving them high and dry versus let's see those projects?
Right.
They've already been ranked high
That's,
enough
I think
once.
it's something important. We
I like
need to
that, yeah.
Understand.
So something
Yeah.
where going through and evaluating what areas have already received COG funding. Right, if 100 West comes back for an extension farther north,
yeah, Wolfpack Way would fall under
yeah,
this.
Wolfpack Way. Where's the COG already said, this is a priority, we've already spent millions of dollars here, let's.
And that might just be a yes or no question, you know,
Yeah.
either get the points or you don't.
Okay, good. And how about, does a project require, rewarding projects don't require right of way acquisition, is that contrary to what we're trying to, you know, it goes against the quarter preservation element, but you're also trying to avoid projects that are gonna probably be beyond what the. you
I
know,
think
the-
that's
the program
important. We
can
had to
fund.
deal with that with Providence not too long ago, where they had not required, or had not acquired the right of ways they needed. We actually had people come to the meeting and bring that out. Am I right on that, Jeff? How'd that go?
No, you're right.
And that caused a lot of issues.
The challenge though will be that, you know, we got projects that haven't been designed yet, so we don't know how much right of way is needed. And so it might just be, I mean, in my view, I think if you had just some rating of the complexity of project delivery. You know, how messy is it gonna be? Is there a lot of right of way that's needed?
I think
Is
it's
there-
important
is
you,
there
it's
A
very
lot of
clear cut
wetlands?
that you've got the right of ways
Yeah.
before we fund.
Well,
But
If you don't,
I guess I'll counter that with saying one of the. We fund right away with COG money.
I get, yeah, if that's
And
stated in
so-
the fact that if it's not, if you
Yeah.
haven't said, we're gonna fund that because we can get it.
Yeah,
But if you're saying, well, I think we can, and you fund them and then they can't,
no, agreed.
You know, some of that comes back to that funding cycle again,
Yeah.
right? Well,
And that's what I'm trying to.
there's planning over here and then there's gonna be the funding over here.
And that's what I'm bouncing my head. You're absolutely right. And when we're at the individual cycles, if they don't have a way to get the right of way, there's no reason to fund the
and
project.
that's what I'm saying, we need to understand they've got their way.
But at the
They have their
planning.
way planned.
planning phase, it's hard to know what right of way you need.
And
And
that might,
it's not necessarily a bad thing that you need right away. It's just,
No.
but it does add complexity and it makes the project more
yeah, and
expensive.
it might throw out though a lot of the new roads, because I know that having seen some of the projects that have come in, there's a significant number of them that are fairly new roads and would require some major right of way acquisition. That are probably part of what you're just gonna thrash all those projects. It all get zero if it's a new road towards that category.
I think what you're trying to get at is how messy and nasty is this project gonna be to deliver?
Western arterial, zero.
And there can be things besides right of way that make it messy. Wetlands.
Yeah, environmental.
Environmental
clearances.
stuff. And I don't know,
Need one bridge, 3 bridges.
yeah. Maybe we chew on this more, and maybe come back.
More road.
I think it gets a little messy to just say, if you need, because there's some, like you said, new roads have a lot of acquisition. But it still could be a very worthy project. You know,
Yeah, right, we look at Wolfpack Way going north of where it is now. Up in the Smith, there's a chunk that is pretty much all needs right of way acquisition through there. So you don't want to say,
ideally, you'd say, okay, well, how cooperative are the landowners? But that's beyond the scale of what we can do, is go talk to individual landowners.
But I think if they're wanting funding, they better have done some of that legwork.
Yeah, certainly by the time they apply for it, but it's a question of
at the planning.
the
stage,
high level
what
planning for 30 years versus.
that
I'm not
years.
inclined as a COG member to vote for anything that has right of ways that aren't clear because. Yeah, I'm tying up funds that somebody else could use that has that are already set to go.
Because COG funds aren't used to acquire right of way.
No, they
They
can
can
be,
be.
he's just saying that it makes it messy.
We just want assurance that they've already reached out and have a.
Yeah.
It's hard to get, if they're coming in for a funding cycle and say, oh, well, we're asking for $1
And
million
you haven't
to
done-
buy the right of way.
Right.
and
That would
$1
need
million
to be a
construct
preceding
it.
project phase, right?
Yeah, like
You
right now,
know,
the county, we've got money just for right of way. North Logan have got some right of way and some engineering, so.
Yeah.
We usually require 30% design, so we make sure we're purchasing the right of way.
Right.
And then. But we don't wanna fund a project, put $3 million on a project and have one property owner
Right.
hold out, and now it's. That
Right.
3 million sat for 10 years till that person finally was able to. Let's see, was finally able to get the property.
I think it was 3 years before Providence resolved theirs, wasn't it?
Yeah,
They
it took
kinda
them a
got it.
while.
But we'd given the funds 3 years prior to.
Okay. I think that's good input. We will. Kind of take a look at this and get back with Jeff and Jesse and kind of put something out. Kind of a formal proposal on this. Ready for the results?
Well, they're switching over. We appreciate it too. We have all kind of the elected officials that showed up for the meeting, so we know that takes. You prioritizing your schedules and making things work, but it was great that. Everyone was able to make this work and able to come, voice their input. see where we're at, so we appreciate your guys' sacrifice and being able to be here and be a part of this process.
And if I can maybe recommend where we go from here, before we pivot to that. So we talked about sending out that needs list and refining it. I'm a little hesitant of sending out this criteria until we get a little more refined. And so I think what we probably ought to do is refine it, decide whether we want another steering committee meeting. I think we need one. And then get it kind of, so you can feel good about saying, this is what we recommend to the full COG. And then we need to talk about where we go from there. I think we probably ought to have a full COG meeting early in January. And the primary focus be, well, there'll be a few things, some housekeeping things, but the primary focus ought to be this, getting their support on this criteria and our approach. Does
I agree
sound
with that
good?
because we promised them, that's what we would do. We keep them informed.
Yeah. And that way we can have a technical committee meeting and get their input in as before the steering committee meetings begin, which will likely be into January because it gets a little hard to have a meeting.
Okay.
Disappear. Yeah, well, it's on my screen.
Oh,
Do this.
sometimes it treats it as a.
You got it,
monitor.
your screen sharing settings.
Can I just?
You just duplicate this.
Oh, yeah. There it is. That was the resulting percentages for each category. It looks like mobility kind of came out as the highest weighted. Connectivity, good health, implementation, and then economy.
That doesn't surprise me because that's what we're all experiencing is mobility issues.
Well, that's good. I'm glad it
So would you be
reflects.
okay if we kind of try to translate this into a weighting then? Okay.
2015, 25, 2020,
Yeah. I would say to
around, not getting 14.
25, 20, 20, 15 is that? what
Yeah,
you said?
kind of just round up to, right, not a 19 and a 14 and a,
Yeah.
but just kind of
20.
20s and a 25 and a 15.
So scores will be kind of weighted per. Scores will be categorized per what we just went through and then overall
Let
weighted.
me
by
just ask a
category.
question to the committee here. Just because mobility come in where it's at, how many of you looked at mobility as saying that would also increase good health and connected community? How many of you looked at that and kind of summarize those together, say one will improve the other? Am I out of bounds in saying that?
They all kind of overlap.
Yeah, I would agree.
Uh, But I think it's just kind of a way to give certain guiding principles some influence. in the
Yeah, what I'm
process.
trying to say is, just because that's where it come in, doesn't mean we don't take seriously good health
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
or implementation.
Right.
We understand that, but we also understand that once we gain this, those others will probably fall
Yeah,
in line
for
as
sure.
well.
Yeah.
I think that's all we got.
Mayor, do you have anything else? Are you okay with that process?
I'm good with that. Committee?
All right, so we'll hope to kind of at a staff level and with technical committee revisit this and send something out to the steering committee hopefully before the end of the year. And then we could do another steering committee meeting early in the year and also schedule a COG meeting to present this to the full COG. Does that sound good?
That is good because we committed to them to keep them informed. Yeah, I think we need to do that.
And in the meantime, we'll send out the GIS map to all the cities as soon as we get that kind of tightened up a bit and get their input on what we're trying to do is make sure we have enough information to be able to turn the crank on this prioritization process. And also get their input of, did we miss something?
Explain it. I think we had a good question here from Dave on how come there was they need to understand that was, those separations are because you did individual city interviews.
Yeah,
And
it's not a master plan,
No.
it's just an
We need to make that
inventory
clear.
of project needs. What did
Yeah.
cities tell us? This is what it is.
Yeah.
These are the type of projects. We hope to be able to put some generalized costs on them. Now, when we're costing out these projects, realize that we're doing it at a high level. We're doing it at, I think we assume 6 million per lane mile or per road mile for a collector. And we're kind of using some cost estimates that we've developed with this Utah Unified Plan to drive that. So they're high level costs, but yeah, this is just a wish list and it's not a plan. It's just of cities, what have they identified? Where are they? What type of projects they are? And what are we gonna run through this prioritization process?
We can zip down to Smith or up to Smithfield.
And there's some things too that like, we still need to go in and. Right, even based on this year's COG funding cycle has adjusted that, because there are projects on there that now are funded, so. They can kind of come off that plan and some things
Yeah.
that maybe, even in reviewing it, like maybe we got drawn in the wrong place, or so there's gonna be a little bit more of just kind of that cleaning up process. But hopefully by sending it out to the cities for their review, getting it back, we can get a nice clean. Thing set up so when we do go to cost it and prioritize things, we have the right scope for all the different
But
projects.
this is kind of cool that we have this, because we've never had kind of a full capture of needs. Poor Eric had to sit through hundreds of hours of videos.
Oh, he didn't do it.
I did some.
And, you know, when we came around and videotape meeting with the cities, so he could try to capture what we have. But yeah, I think this is kind of a big lift to get this data all together.
Oh, I'm sorry, because you had being one of the people.
No. Feel like I need to get to Jesse before even talking to him. Wow. Didn't hear him on all the interviews.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna get this cleaned up. This is kind of a fresh off the press deal, but we'll get it cleaned up and then you could consider this a needs map essentially.
Yeah.
Showing all the needs across the jurisdictions.
In fact, for the Utah Unified Plan that all of us MPOs and transportation agencies, UDOT included, I mean, we're using this as our needs list. And what that means is, you know, when we kind of, the messaging that comes from that unified plan is here's what we need, here's what we can afford. And, you know, that illustrates what the gap is. So it helps send the message to the legislatures and others, what is the real need? Does that make sense? So this is good that we have this. This captures our overall need. Because we have needs on the state road system, but unique to Cache County is much of our need is on the secondary collector class system. We don't have the ability to do big freeways or widen freeways, so a lot of our needs are on the collector road, so it's important that we capture these. Thanks.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and everyone online. We're gonna